Welcome everyone to our program today, Sustainable Groundwater Management in California, the Challenges Ahead. I'm Laurel Plimier. I'm the president of the League of Women Voters of Piedmont in California, and I want to thank everyone who is joining us today for taking some time out of your day to spend with us, both here virtually on Zoom and in the YouTube space. Today's event is the third in a larger 2022-2023 climate series that's brought to you by the League of Women Voters and of Piedmont and Piedmont Connect. Our previous two programs in September and October talked about wildfires and textiles, respectively, and you can find recordings of those on our YouTube channel. We also have 3 additional programs coming up this year, one on the health impacts from heat, one on transportation, and then finally decarbonizing your home. And as we solidify all the events for those, all the details for those events, you'll see them show up on our website. And our website is lwvpiedmont.org. We hope that you'll join us, of course, for those events also. Today's event is co-sponsored by the Leagues of Women Voters of the Bay Area, of Oakland, and of Solano County, all in California. And we have members from at least 18 different local leagues representing California, Oregon, and Colorado who are joining us today. So welcome and thank you for being here. Before we get into the introduction of today's guest speaker, I wanted to quickly go over a few logistics. So if you are in the Zoom call with us, sorry, I'm just changing the chat settings because I'm about to ask you to feel free to introduce yourself in chat, and I think the chat was disabled. So, so if you're on the Zoom call with us, feel free to introduce yourself on chat. You can post questions for our speaker in the Q&A feature, and we'll try to get through as many of those as we can in the second half of the program. And if you are joining us on YouTube or watching the recording of the event there, please consider subscribing to our channel and clicking the bell to get notifications of our future live stream events. For advance notice of upcoming events, please join our mailing list, which you can do on our website. And again, that's lwvpiedmont.org. You can also become a member of the League there. Just about 1/3 of the people who are registered for this event today are not yet members of the League, and we would love to have you join us. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. We encourage informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues, and we influence public policy both through education and advocacy. When we say we're nonpartisan, what we mean by that is that we don't support or oppose any political candidate or political party, but we are political. We're not neutral on policy. When you join the League, your dues alone support our grassroots efforts both locally and at the state and national levels, and this helps us in our mission of empowering voters and defending democracy. You can find a local league if you go to lwv.org, and I think we'll post a specific link for you in the chat shortly. Our League's efforts in voter education and advocacy are extremely important work, and we greatly appreciate your support. So today, I know you're all excited to hear about our topic. Our scheduled guest speaker was called away on an urgent matter, but we have an equally qualified pinch hitter filling in somewhat last minute. So to introduce him, I'm now going to hand things over to Jennifer Trainer, who is on the board of the League of Women Voters of Piedmont. She's currently our voter service director, and she helped to put together this climate series with with Hope Salzer, who is our Climate Advocacy Director. So Jennifer, it's all yours.
Thank you, Laurel, and very deep thanks.
Do you want to unmute your camera too?
Oh, sure. Sorry. Thank you, Laurel, and thank you, Tim, for joining us on stepping in here in the last moment. We really appreciate it. So Tim Godwin is our speaker today. He is a technical policy advisor for SGMA, which, for those of you who don't know, is the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. You'll hear a lot about it today. He's also a supervising engineer and geologist with more than 20 years of experience prior to recently joining the State Department of Water Resources. He's an expert on groundwater and has a lot of knowledge about our water future in California, which is important to all of us. And those of you in Colorado and Oregon as well, I'm sure it's important to you. Among the many facets of his expertise, he's highly knowledgeable about how recharge works, projects that can enhance recharge, soil dynamics, and the myriad other factors that are involved with gathering water in local basins, as well as issues in groundwater policy. He holds a master's degree in geology from Northern Arizona University and a bachelor's in geology and earth science from Cal State Sacramento. Please join me in welcoming Tim Godwin. And Tim, over to you.
See if I can figure out how to make this work. Thank you very much, and I really appreciate the opportunity to come and speak with you all today. I rely on the Women's League of Voters quite extensively in my own personal review of political dynamics and my voting information. So I really value your efforts and your organization. So thank you. And thank you for having me here today to speak about sustainable groundwater management. Again, my name is Tim Godwin. I work for the Department of Water Resources, and I work in the Sustainable Groundwater Management Office. I serve as an advisor, technical and policy-wise, to our Deputy Director, Paul Gosselin, who unfortunately couldn't attend today. He got called away for urgent matters regarding the advancement of our program. So I hope to fill in his shoes well here and maybe just dive right into a presentation and look forward to having a conversation and discussion about your questions and concerns or thoughts on the Sustainable Groundwater Management program. So let me see if I can get this started. Apologies for I get this right. Okay, am I sharing my presentation screen? Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you all again. And let's dive into what's going on with sustainable groundwater management. So let's talk about groundwater right up front. So groundwater is our unseen resource, right? It's below our feet. It's within the soil. It's within the geology. And yet it is one of the most important resources to the state in terms of weathering drought, in terms of having reliable water when our surface waters just simply aren't available. Who relies upon that? We rely on it in the state quite extensively. Anywhere from 40 to 60% of our total water supply comes from groundwater in some capacity or another. There are areas within our state that are entirely groundwater dependent, and others that have a mix of surface water and groundwater that supplies their needs. And those needs include agriculture, our drinking water system, our environmental needs, as well as our industrial and business practices. So in California, we haven't had required groundwater management in our state ever. And SGMA is our acronym for the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And we'll dive into just exactly what that act entails and how it's being implemented. So our surface water in the state has been effectively managed under a water rights structure since 1914. At that point in time, the legislature didn't feel they had enough information or ability to manage groundwater. And so they did not establish a water rights structure for our groundwater system. So here we are 100 plus years later, and SGMA is being proposed within the legislature in 2014, 100 years later. And we've tried a number of different management styles and strategies. We call them carrot strategies, where we are incentivizing good actors and people to plan around managing their groundwater resources through voluntary efforts. SGMA changes that dynamic and says, no, some of these basins, groundwater is so important that you need to manage groundwater. And SGMA relies upon local agencies to manage those resources. The legislature found that, the local knowledge of the groundwater basins just can't be surpassed. The 100 years of use in the basin gives them the experience of know how the basin functions, and it's very critical to managing it. And they rely upon the local agencies then to implement SGMA. So let's dive into what SGMA is and does. So as I alluded to in 2014, the law was signed into the legislation was signed into law in late 2014, following or actually in the midst of a pretty significant drought, a drought from 2012 to 2016. And we were experiencing things like increased subsidence conditions. We were experiencing the dewatering of domestic drinking water sources. And water supply sources for larger water systems. It was very critical that some action was taken to start to understand how we can manage this resource moving forward. So the piece of legislation identifies largely four main categories of practitioners within this law. Pardon me. The first being the stakeholders, the people who were managing this water resource for. These are everybody within these basins and how they use the basins. They're absolutely integral to defining what a groundwater sustainability plan is and what its intentions are to serve that population. Then there's three agencies. This is the political side of it. So one, there are the GSAs. These are the groundwater sustainability agencies. These are based upon existing local agencies or new local agencies that were established to implement SGMA. So what you see in most cases is these are irrigation districts, reclamation districts, cities, counties, existing water agencies that have been managing water in the region for quite some time. One thing that SGMA required was the covering of the entire basin that is being managed by a groundwater sustainability agency. In some places, some of these local jurisdictions didn't quite cover all of the basin. And so the county has a very prescriptive role here, and they serve as a backstop. And they would effectively cover those areas not covered by local agencies, should that be necessary. They also have the option of opting out of managing those areas, leaving it unmanaged, which is problematic for implementation of SGMA. Then we have DWR. That's my agency, the Department of Water Resources. Our job is to review the groundwater sustainability plans and really help local agencies through a variety of assistance programs to implement and be successful with their sustainable management actions. Then we also have our sister agency, the State Water Resources Control Board. State Water Resources Control Board is most often known for their role in administering the water rights structure within California. They come in should we find that a local agency or a basin is not making adequate progress towards meeting their groundwater sustainability goals, or just simply aren't in compliance with their plan in accordance with the regulation. So this is the interaction of these four bodies, the input for the stakeholders, our groundwater sustainability agency, DWR, and State Water Resource Control Board. So what's different about SGMA? What's different about SGMA is how sustainability is defined. So what are the objectives of these plans? The plans are intended to avoid, sustainability would be defined as avoidance of these undesirable results. So bad impacts that are occurring related to groundwater. And there are 6 categories, one being the chronic lowering of groundwater levels. So continued decline of water level from the surface. So limiting access to our drinking water or groundwater resources. The reduction of storage. So how is that bucket, if you will, of water being reduced over time? You can see that closely relates to declines of groundwater levels. Seawater intrusion. Many of our basins sit along the shore of the ocean. As you pump groundwater in those basins, that groundwater is replaced by seawater intruding into the aquifers towards the land. That greatly diminishes the available water and storage of fresh water for domestic uses and replaces it with brackish or salt water that doesn't have as great of a use. Degraded water quality. So again, a relevant category. Anytime that the groundwater is being managed in a way that the quality of the water is continuing to decline, that's problematic. And a large one here, and unique one that we're seeing across the state is land subsidence. Land subsidence is when aquifers, the groundwater is pumped so heavily that some of the clays within the aquifer collapse. And as they collapse, the land surface actually sinks. So you can see that that's going to have an effect. We see impacts on bridges, roadways, railways, pipelines, our flood control structures, and most importantly, our water conveyance structures. So in the Central Valley in particular, the federal water project along the Kern-Frank Canal, due to subsidence, saw a 60% reduction in the capacity to convey water down that canal. And there are millions of people and millions of acres of agriculture that are dependent upon that water supply. We're actively repairing that piece of infrastructure as we're implementing SGMA and trying to address land subsidence. And then probably the most complicated indicator here is the depletion of interconnected streams. This is a unique piece to SGMA. This openly acknowledges the direct connection of surface water and groundwater. So as you pump groundwater, that replacement water that would replenish the groundwater system has to come from somewhere. And it is coming from our surface water bodies, be it rivers and streams or lakes or other runoff that would have naturally found its way to a riverway is replenishing groundwater as a result of pumping. So we're asking local agencies, and this is a very difficult one, and we're working through development of guidance as to how to understand what that impact can be and how it would affect the users of that surface water that need to be managed. So that was a big chunk of SGMA. This is kind of the core, and sorry it took a long time here. We can circle back in as you have questions about this. So our groundwater sustainability plans. In general, they are simple plans with a lot of detail that are embedded in them. Consequently, they get pretty large. Some of these basins are very large and they're difficult to describe. So one of the main categories is who's involved here. So we talk about the administrative information. Who are the local agencies? Who are the cities and counties? Who are the users of groundwater in the basin? How does water get applied across the basin, and how should it be managed? Then what? We're talking about what is the condition in the basin? Is groundwater flush? Is it full? Are you overdrafted? Have you depleted these aquifers a lot? What is the geology that controls the flow of groundwater through the system? So kind of think setting. We're trying to set the stage for how we're going to manage. Then SGMA is about metrics. It's about quantification of how these things work. And so we just described the 6 indicators. We call them sustainability indicators. And we have set criteria for those. And so local agencies are required to describe where and how in their basin those conditions that they're trying to avoid are being avoided. So they are required to establish things like minimum threshold at specific wells. So how low can the water level go before they feel that an undesirable result is being triggered? In addition, they're also required to set measurable objectives. Where's that upper limit? Where do we want to strive to be? How flush do we want our basin, and how does that help us, one, provide for all the beneficial uses and users in the basin, but then two, also manage and weather our changing climate and recurring droughts that occur. So this is about protecting our drought buffers and being prepared for climate change moving forward. Climate change is a significant part of SGMA, and local agencies are starting to incorporate considerations of how that might change over time and what that means to their water supply in the long term. Then how are they going to meet their objectives? What are their goals? These are the projects and management actions. And there's a lot of need here to help local agencies achieve some of these projects. Some of them are very ambitious. Projects and management actions in an overdrafted basin often look towards how can we increase the supply to our basin. So there's two knobs. There's groundwater supply and there's groundwater demand. Groundwater demand means we're using less groundwater. That means impact to drinking water users, through conservation efforts. That means reduction of our agricultural footprint. And really, that's a very challenging thing for local agencies to buy into. So their first focus is to turn towards supply. They want to increase the supply. So there's a number of ways to do that. One, you can import more water. Two, you can create conservation and conjunctive use projects where you're using surface water and distributing it more versus groundwater. Three, you're starting to increase your recharge. How do we capture our storm flows and storm runoff? We just experienced a horrendous, a massive atmospheric river event. This is a bit of an extreme, and it's difficult to say we can capture that much water at the rate it's coming down. But local agencies are looking to how they can optimize that and capture as much as they can and still remain safe and protecting the property in their areas. So these are big ticket items to the groundwater sustainability plans. And really, if you wanted to go through a plan, you could containerize it this way and step through it just to understand how local agencies are trying to address the groundwater sustainability agencies. I'll pick up pace and kind of move through this quickly so you get a good picture of where we're at. So the law was passed, the players are there. The department developed two sets of regulations, one being a regulation to modify groundwater basin boundaries. We want locals to say, yeah, our basin boundary isn't quite the way you have it depicted, DWR. We have better scientific information. Here it is. And generally we say, yes, this makes sense. And we can modify the basin boundary. And that is the base unit that compliance is being met at. So we are looking for local agencies to manage the groundwater basin they are in and completely. And then second is the rules as to how to develop a groundwater sustainability plan. So those are the two sets of regulations we had to develop. Both of those sets of regulations are a little unique in terms of the legislature. These were established as under emergency regulations, and they will continue to be emergency regulations in perpetuity. So that's a little unique. What that does is it really enables us to make adjustments if necessary. So far, we haven't seen a real need to make significant changes to the law or the regulations. We think they're working, and we will make adjustments as needed. But those adjustments get reviewed by the California Water Commission and would need to be adopted by them in order for them to be effective. And obviously would follow a public process to get those kinds of changes pushed forward. No changes are anticipated at this time. So our groundwater sustainability agencies, they were required to form by 2017. The law was really kind of getting going in 2015. So we had 2 years to develop these new local agencies, new governance structures to manage a resource that hadn't been managed before in this way. That's pretty tall ask. I'll just say this, local control stepped forward. We had 99% compliance with that rule. That was very impressive. And I'll just say the 1% was administrative and was able to be resolved through some discussions and negotiations at the local level to figure out how best to manage that. So kudos to the local agencies for stepping forward and taking on this challenge. And then we had effectively 2 rounds of groundwater sustainability plans submitted to the department. So the first was required to be submitted in 2020, January of 2020. And those were basins that had been previously identified as basins in critical condition of overdraft. In other words, they had been in overdraft, they pumped more groundwater than is replenishing, and groundwater level declines were increasing, or additional impacts like seawater intrusion or water quality impacts triggered them to be identified as critically overdrafted and highlighted the need for management to be implemented earlier than the others. The others, we termed those, we had to go through a prioritization process. Those were high and medium priority basins, and the higher medium really just depicts the extent to which groundwater is relied upon within that basin. Not that there's significant problems or more or less in any one of those basins, just really about the dependence on groundwater that prioritize them. Each of those were required to submit plans either in 2020 for critically overdrafted or 2022 for the remaining high and medium priority basins. And what you can see in the California graphic in the middle is the blue represent all the areas where groundwater sustainability plans were submitted. You also see a pink color there, and that's the alternative to GSPs. Didn't mention this, but for those local agencies who were already managing groundwater in a nearly sustainable way, had a plan, or could really demonstrate that they were sustainable for 10 years or more. And really in Piedmont area, there's a couple of those agencies who submitted alternative plans. Those were submitted to the department back in 2017 and was really an illustration of longer term management in those basins that they were already sustainable or had a very clear plan to achieve sustainability. So those were those different ones, and there's just a handful of them. Looking at the graphic on the right, I just want to highlight the complexity of some of these basins. SGMA allowed for multiple groundwater sustainability plans to be developed in a basin, but it also required them to be highly coordinated in how the methods and approach for how they quantify all of the groundwater and surface water within the basin. And so what you can see in the color ramp here is the yellowish shades are single plans that were submitted for a single basin. And those darker red colors are multiple groundwater sustainability plans submitted for a single basin. So you can see our winner in this one is Kings County, and they had submitted 7 groundwater sustainability plans, all administered under a coordination agreement that really defined very specifically how they are going to quantify their metrics and measure their success towards reaching sustainability. So again, where SGMA applies, there are 515 alluvial groundwater basins. Alluvial groundwater basins are really our lowland areas. These are areas where our basins, the areas filled up with sands and gravels and silts and clays that are really particulate in nature, and they have pore space where the water can saturate. That's our groundwater that's being managed. Outside of there, you can see the gray areas on that graphic on the left are really our hard rock areas. This is where you have granites or metamorphic rock, where groundwater really exists within fractures within those cracks in the rocks, and is really limited in extent in terms of how they are connected and how an area may be affected. So SGMA is focused on the 515 alluvial groundwater basins. And as I highlighted before, we prioritize those basins. Of those 515, 94 basins were determined to be high or medium priority basins. Those high and medium priority basins account for 90% of our groundwater pumping in the state. So we captured the largest areas where groundwater is very highly relied upon and likely necessary for management. Within those, we've also identified the 21 critically overdrafted basins. And I told you earlier, those critically overdrafted basins were required to provide groundwater sustainability plans by 2020, while the other 94 high and medium priority basins weren't required to supply those until 2022. I think I kind of covered all this ground as I was going. Sorry, I'm jumping into this a little late, but again, our COD, our critically overdrafted basins, the submission dates are all listed here, and these slides will be made available for people to use as reference. I wanted to highlight, though, a location, particular importance for our program, and this is what we term the SGMA portal. This is where you go to find all of this information. All of this information is made available electronically, along with comments that were submitted and provided, our assessments, any correspondence. We were committed very early on to making this program fully transparent. And this has been a great work in action. I'd say feel free, jump into this, browse around. You can type in your location and it will direct you to who your groundwater sustainability agency is, what plan is representing your area. And you can see there's a number of these green dots on the graphic on the lower right, groundwater sustainability agencies, our groundwater sustainability plans, an alternative plan if you're involved with those. Adjudications. Adjudications SGMA was specific about and provided a streamlined process that will take adjudications from ideally 10-year processes and compact them down much more quickly to come to resolution, but generally follow the requirements of SGMA. So that's a big change in adjudicatory processes. And here's also the basin boundary modifications and some other information. So feel free, browse that. I'm happy to answer any questions should anybody ask. Please feel free to contact me. So what does our regulatory pathway look like? Currently, we are making determinations. We're a little further out here in this end. So DWR has 2 years to review the groundwater sustainability plans, and I will say they are complicated. There is a lot of information, and we are scrutinizing it carefully. We really want to see local agencies be successful and continue to manage groundwater at the local level. Should a plan be determined to be inadequate, it is referred to the state board where there are public hearing processes, and the state board will work with local agencies to get them back on track and back into the department, back under local control. So we do have a backstop, and that's the role that they serve. But effectively, we have 3 determinations that are available to us under the law. That is, we can approve a plan. We can deem a plan incomplete. In other words, it's got a few deficiencies that are precluding our approval. And we're allowed to give 180 days for local agencies to address those deficiencies and resubmit those. We are currently reviewing many of the COD basins that were deemed incomplete and are preparing to release the assessments of those reviews of the resubmission, or reviews of the resubmission. How about that? So we are in the midst of this process now, and you should expect to see some of our assessments for these plans rolling out this quarter and in the subsequent quarters throughout this year. So you're hitting it right. You're going to see a lot of activity coming from the department in our review of the groundwater sustainability plans that have been submitted. So where do we stand right now? Of the critically overdrafted basins, or those that submitted in 2020, we approved 8 of the 21 plans that were submitted. Many of these, all of these, also included, while we approved them, they included recommended corrective actions, things that they can work on. If you recall, there's a 20-year period that local agencies are striving to reach their sustainability goal. There's some work to be done to align towards SGMA. It's a tall ask, and local agencies are already actively addressing those recommended corrective actions and realigning their plans to support that. So I mentioned earlier, we determined 13 plans to be incomplete from those critically overdrafted basins. All of those plans resubmitted within the 180 days, and that was excellent, and we've been reviewing them. However, one of the plans, Tulare Lake Subbasin, had a small challenge with the plan they had adopted, there was some divergence within the basin. As you can imagine, there's some disagreement at the local level about how this should be managed. And there was some concern, and consequently, because they submitted two separate plans, they failed to meet some of the fundamental criteria over coordinating if you have multiple plans in the basin. So currently we're working with them to get them back on track, and much of that action is ongoing. But everybody else has submitted their plans for reevaluation, and we are preparing to release assessments in the coming months for those basins. So what did we see in these critically overdrafted incomplete determination? I'd say foundationally, we saw a general lack of coordination for those that had multiple GSPs. And that's a real challenge. About doing the math the same way. If people are doing math two different ways, you're going to come out with two different answers. That's going to create potential for disagreement, arguments, dispute. We want to have a unified front in terms of how we quantify. People agree to this is how we quantify the water. And then the challenge is, how do we define sustainability? What is a significant and unreasonable condition to the local? That's something they have to weigh against the beneficial uses and users in their basin and how they want to set their goals and objectives. We also saw challenges around subsidence, how subsidence was evaluated, how the beneficial uses and users were considered in the projected outcomes of the subsidence conditions in the basins. Water quality, similar suit, not considering beneficial uses and users, and a real challenging one to consider about how water quality changes across the entire basin. Often water quality issues are localized, and many of these plans identify those localized water quality challenges and commit to not exacerbating those conditions. We have regulatory roles already in place to address water quality through our regional water quality control boards, and they're active in that arena. Groundwater level and drinking water impacts. Many of these agencies didn't have a firm grasp of what their projected groundwater levels would be in 20 years and what kind of an impact to the drinking water users that would result in. So we've asked them to sharpen the pencil and look more closely at that and really assess how those beneficial uses and users are affected. And then the last one being the depletion of interconnected surface water. As I highlighted before, this is a very challenging metric to quantify. And so we are continuing to work with local agencies. We're developing guidance to support them. We're going to be working with them over the next several years to get something really landed there where people can understand what this means and how best to define sustainability around it. Okay, SGMA implementation, again, 20-year horizon. We've gone through the establishment of the Act, the establishment of GSAs, the submission of critically overdrafted GSPs, high and medium priority GSPs and alternatives, and we're currently in this middle section. This is a long-term implementation. Plans will be reviewed by local agencies every 5 years and updated as appropriate. They will submit those plans back to the department for review, and we will provide assessments every 5 years on these plans. We call those periodic updates. In addition to those, every year, an annual report is required to be provided to the department that really describes what the conditions are within the basin, how groundwater levels change, how is subsidence changing, how is water quality changing, and how are they progressing towards implementing their projects and management actions that are necessary for them to reach their sustainability goals. It's a communication opportunity. And again, all of this information is made available on the SGMA portal and available for folks to review. So that's our regulatory hat. We also have traditionally held an assistance hat. So SGMA Assistance has been quite broad and quite a lot of work that has come out for local agencies to really take the data, apply it to what they want to do, and report back to us. So we've been trying to give them the data that's necessary for them to make informed decisions and define sustainability locally. So to do that, we have financial assistance, we have technical assistance, and we have planning assistance. Our financial assistance, we've given out almost $400 million to support local agencies in development of plans and development of projects that they are trying to implement. There's another round coming, and we hope to see a lot of success with that one. Technical assistance. We've been providing direct assistance through installation of monitoring wells. We've been providing stream gauge support. We also provide a lot of data. I'll highlight California Groundwater Live, Cal Groundwater Live. It's an online platform that you can look at and understand exactly what our understanding is of the conditions in your basin in almost real time. So that's another website, and I can provide all of these websites. Well, this is actually a link, so if you get the PowerPoint, you'll be able to access it that way. But I can provide these websites as well for you to explore the data in your world and to understand how the department is seeing what is going on locally. We also have an opportunity for folks to report their dry well. Should their well go dry, what do you do? Who do you turn to? And so this is an opportunity to communicate. I have a dry well. I'm here in this location. I need assistance, which we've been providing hauled water for, or working with local agencies to find other solutions. And then we've also really stepped up on our reporting for land subsidence data. So the land subsidence is critical for us to understand because it has a significant impact to our state infrastructure and how we move water, how we protect livelihood around flood infrastructure, and how we drive down the road. I mean, we're having impacts to roadways and other infrastructure sets that are very critical for our safety and well-being. Planning assistance. This is a big one, and we provide facilitation services that are independent of the department, and we want local agencies to have realistic and structured debates about these challenging issues they're facing and trying to define. We also are providing translation services, both written and currently right now we're trying to provide spoken translation services for public meeting. And so that's another function we're trying to support our groundwater sustainability agencies in doing. We've also developed a series of best management practices and guidance documents. And those again are located on our web pages and have been tremendously valuable for local agencies to understand what is meant by some of these regulatory requirements and how they should approach the problem. And then we also have our regional office staff. Our regional office staff are integral to working within the region and are great points of contact. They attend these meetings regularly and are a great resource to reach out to understand how it's going in your basin and who they can talk to get more information. So where are we going? We're in implementation mode. All the plans have been submitted. Local agencies have adopted these plans. These are the local agencies' plans. The department's reviewing them for compliance, but it's still the local agency's plans. They can continue to implement this and continue to strive towards sustainable groundwater management. So what are they doing? They're trying to address corrective actions that we may have provided. They're filling data gaps to make a more informed decision about the projects and actions that are necessary, or maybe how they define sustainability needs to be adjusted based upon more data that's coming into them. Importantly, they're building local agency capacity. They are trying to develop funding mechanisms and to help them fill these data gaps and implement those project management actions necessary for them to have sustainable groundwater management. So some of the state initiatives that are going on to support these local actions. LandFlex. LandFlex is a pilot program that is coming around that is targeted towards supporting disadvantaged communities whose drinking water has been impacted by nearby agricultural pumping. And this is a great program that's trying to pilot a targeted fallowing process that helps local agencies and the growers align to the sustainable management allocations that may be available and address some of the demand reduction that may be required in some of these basins, while hopefully supporting the local drinking water supply in those areas. This is red hot. It was just released this last week, and we are currently soliciting information. There's a webcast tomorrow to talk about more information. So if you have interest in that, I'd encourage you to look it up, and we'll be online tomorrow to talk about it some more. California Water Commission has also put forward, in conjunction with the Water Resiliency Plan, a white paper talking about groundwater trading. As you can imagine, as the water becomes more scarce, there's opportunities for local agencies and locals to trade their allocations of water across the basin to help balance the load where necessary. We've also been working with the Environmental Defense Fund and the California Data Consortium to establish a water accounting platform where we're utilizing OpenET data. So OpenET is a open software package that is really supporting the distribution of evapotranspiration data so we understand how and where water is being used most. We also have the water supply strategy, and in particular, most recently, the executive orders that have been released just recently, where we're really supporting and expediting the construction and implementation of local recharge projects. There's some other state resources, not only with DWR and LandFlex, we have the Department of Conservation with their multi-benefit land repurposing program, Sustainable Agricultural Land Conservation Program, looking at soil preservation. CDFA is working with on-farm efficiencies and healthy soils initiatives. And the governor's office is working with their business and economic development group to really think about how these changes in local water and the impacts that managing these resources may have on local economies and how to find resources to support their transition. I'll stop there. I've been going for a while, sorry. And happy to respond to any additional questions. Here's a great email to reach out to us. Our staff is here and prepared to provide any responses that you may have. But yeah, maybe we do some Q&A with the time we have left. Sorry, I ran a little long there.
That's okay. Thanks so much. And if you can stop sharing.
Yeah, that's down the right button.
There we go. All right. So we do have a bunch of questions, and if folks have more questions, feel free to post them in the Q&A. We'll spend the next 10 or 15 minutes getting through as many as we can. So a lot of the questions are centered around SGMA and the what sustainable actually is. So maybe you could give some examples. I know you talked about the 6 different points that make something sustainable. Are these people who are managing the basins going in and measuring the water? Are they measuring it in feet, in acres? What makes something sustainable versus not sustainable? I mean, you were pretty clear about the goals, but how exactly is this implemented?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And let's just take one step at a time. So there are 6 sustainability indicators, all of which are based upon direct observation of conditions within the basin. So these groundwater sustainability agencies are looking at the conditions in the basin. And then they're asking themselves, who are the users in the basin? And what would a change in that condition mean to those users? A small change may not be considered significant and unreasonable. A large change might. So let's take water levels as an example. So we have water levels, and I'm going to simplify this. This is the challenge of SGMA. Groundwater is not simple. The geology is not simple. It's often layered and has complexity to it. But let's say most domestic wells are screened, built to 100 feet below land surface. Let's say groundwater is at 60 feet below land surface. So if we say that, and it has been declining, so let's say that we're proposing that we can pump the basin more and draw the water table down another 20 feet. Probably not going to impact that many drinking water users, those domestic well users. So that's probably not unreasonable. Well, what if we drew it down another 80 feet? Now we're in the bottom of the well. That's going to have an impact. And they need to assess, is that something that is significant and unreasonable to those users within the basin that we want to avoid those conditions. These are very challenging things to discuss, and they've held a number of local public meetings to talk through these things. So that's one example. Obviously, dewatering of drinking water wells in many instances is considered pretty significant and unreasonable. Some wells may not be constructed to 100 feet, but if you have a well that's an older well and it's constructed to 40 feet, because that's where the water table was 50 years ago when you built the well, an impact to one person may not be equivalent to the impact to another person. And so those are some of the challenging factors that the local groundwater sustainability agencies are facing and having to navigate. Hopefully that helps, but that's the definition of sustainability is defined locally based upon the impacts to the beneficial uses and users of groundwater in that basin.
You talked a little bit about some of the plans being not up to standard, and I'm assuming that's different from being not sustainable. That there's the plan and there's the actual state of the groundwater. And can you also talk a little bit about enforcement? Like, if my plan is not up to snuff, how do you make me get it up to snuff? And if my groundwater level is getting too low, what's your role in that, and what is the basin supposed to do about it?
Excellent question. So let's break it down a little bit. So our role as a department is to review the plan. And so when we say there's a deficiency with the plan, it's not adhering to the regulatory requirements. For example, we've asked for people to consider, and this is something that you can read in assessments now, we've asked for people to consider those beneficial uses and users, and I'll stick with the water level example. We've seen in a number of basins that the managers have determined that they can draw the basin down further. In other words, they can continue the rate of pumping that is currently occurring, and it's going to dewater some wells. We've asked them to assess that and to understand what that impact is going to be, to describe it. So that is one of the corrective actions that we provided in the 180 days for an incomplete determination, that people then reassessed, looked at it. Some local agencies changed their criteria, said, whoa, yeah, that's an impact, and we got to fix that. And others said, you know what, we're not going to fix it, but we're going to provide mitigation. And so they're saying, well, if somebody's well goes dry, we'll replace that well, or we'll provide them with drinking water. So there's a number of ways local agencies are pursuing meeting the standard. However, there are instances where just enough information isn't being provided to clearly understand that the local agency, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, has a clear trajectory towards reaching sustainability within the 20 years. Should that occur, a plan would be determined to be inadequate, and we would refer it to the state board. And the State Water Resource Control Board, obviously a public board, would have hearings and to discuss the deficiencies and discrepancies, and seek to work with a local agency likely to resolve the situation, the deficiency, or as a backstop, they have the authority to develop an interim plan should that be necessary. That interim plan, more likely than not, wouldn't include new supply projects being constructed by the State Water Project. More likely it would be discussions of demand reduction. In other words, you can't pump as much water in the groundwater basin. So these are very challenging things that are in front of us, and we'll be working through those incrementally. So yes, once a plan is determined to be inadequate, it will be deferred to the State Water Resource Control Board, and there will be a public process on that front as well.
When it comes to extraction, how do you or other local agencies monitor how much is actually being extracted? We have some other questions too about people perhaps extracting when they oughtn't be extracting, and how is that regulated and controlled? Yep,
so that's another excellent question. So the Groundwater Sustainability Agency is the local control, and they're the ones responsible for quantifying how much is being pumped. There's a number of ways to evaluate how much a well is pumping. You can put a meter on the well. Some choose to evaluate electrical costs that indicate that the pump has been operating and make some assumptions about how much water is produced. Others are relying upon, I mentioned earlier, OpenET. This is a satellite-based technology that looks at the land surface and looks at the plants that are there and can evaluate how much water that plant is consuming. If it's not being provided surface water, it's coming from groundwater. And this is why the local control is important, because the locals can talk to those people and really connect with them and understand, hey, we need to make this work and work on local solutions to resolve those things. Maybe they can provide surface water in lieu of groundwater pumping. We call that conjunctive use. So there's options out there, and these are the tough things. That yes, some will pump when they have been told they don't have quite that much water to pump, and we'll work through those hopefully locally. But should they not make adequate progress, or we continue to see those sustainability indicators be tripped, that would be something that we could refer to the state board later on.
We have time for about one more question. I know we're not going to get through all of them, so I apologize for people whose questions won't get answered. But I was hoping you could talk a little bit about, you talked about the huge climate rain that we've had in the past several weeks, and that we can't possibly capture all of that rain. How does some of that rain get into the groundwater? What percentage of it does get into the groundwater? What are the methods that are currently being used to capture that groundwater? And does it have an effect on groundwater levels, even though we can't capture a good chunk of it?
Yeah, excellent. And this is something that I have a passion for, is recharge. We started a process of technical assistance. We have been conducting geophysics across the entire state. You may have seen the helicopter with a giant hoop fly across your neighborhood. This is aerial electromagnetic geophysics, and what it's doing is evaluating the geology underneath. If we understand where those connections are to those coarse grained aquifers, and we can put water on the surface that would intersect those, we can put more water into the ground. We are really looking at advancing groundwater recharge across the state. Today, I was out in the field with some local agencies implementing these projects. They're taking water that was spilling out of a creek and flooding the area, and they're flooding more fields. So they're making sure that the floodwater is distributed and staying put and saturating the soils and moving down in the groundwater system. They also have monitoring wells out there, and they could see the effect on the groundwater level. This last storm, they had a nearly 50-foot increase in this single well, so they could see an immediate response to the aquifer. We have a lot of monitoring wells out there. Local agencies, the groundwater sustainability agencies are required to monitor, and this will be some of the metrics that we'll be quantifying to show how SGMA advances. These projects that people are looking to implement are recharge projects. We've had the FloodMar effort program be developed out of our department. And so you look into that, we're actually looking at spreading excess waters on our farmlands to encourage greater recharge.
Thank you so much. I do have to be mindful of the time. I really appreciate all of the thoughtful questions and all of the information that you've shared with us. I'm also very grateful to you for Tim for joining us, sort of pinch hitting at the last minute. I really appreciate it. As a reminder, our next climate series event is coming up on February 8th, and it'll be on the health effects of heat. Recordings of our past events, including this one, will be available on our YouTube channel, and we will be sending a follow-up email to everyone who's registered to the event that will include a link to the recording. So feel free to share that with family and friends who were not able to join us live. And if you are watching on YouTube, please consider subscribing to our channel to access future events. And also please consider joining the League of Women Voters. Thank you so much. Thank you again to Tim Godwin of the California Department of Water Resources. And this officially ends